They call me the Reaper of Threshold Station. I have 41 confirmed captures across 9 star systems. There is a price on my head set by 3 different governments, and my name alone is enough to clear out a bar before I even reach the counter to order a drink. I have tracked Vril war priests through the twisting halls of their own temple ships. I have pulled Kathorn crime lords out of bunkers built to survive an attack from orbit. Fear is not something I feel very often, and warnings are not something I give very often either. But I want to tell you about the one job I walked away from. I want to tell you why, if you ever plan to make a living by hunting people for money, you should never, ever take a contract to hunt a human. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning matters here. I grew up on a mining moon with 3 sons and no real law. My mother used to say that in a place like that, you either learn to be dangerous or you learn to be prey. I chose dangerous early. By the time I was old enough to hold a weapon steady, I already had a reputation among the other children for being the one nobody wanted to fight twice. That reputation followed me into adulthood, and then into a career, and then into a legend that other mercenaries told each other around firelight on distant worlds. I built that legend one contract at a time. I never took jobs I could not finish. I never chased targets I did not understand. Before every hunt, I studied my prey the way a scholar studies an old language, patiently, carefully, until I knew their habits better than they did. That discipline is the real reason I am still alive today, while so many of my old rivals are not. So when the consortium came to me with a job involving a human, I did what I always do. I studied. At that time, your species was still new to the wider galaxy. Barely 30 years had passed since your first contact with an alien government. Most of the older species still saw humans the way you might see a talkative new neighbor, curious, a little strange, mostly harmless, and definitely not something to worry about. Humans were known for being short-lived compared to most spacefaring races, physically unimpressive next to a Kathorn or a Vril, and famous across 100 worlds for asking too many questions in diplomatic meetings. I did not know then how wrong that picture was. Nobody did. The contract came from a consortium executive named Director Halveth, a tall, thin being with pale gray skin and eyes that never quite settled on you when he spoke. He met me in a private lounge on Threshold Station, the kind of place with soft lighting and expensive drinks that nobody actually enjoys, because everyone there is too busy pretending to be calm. "We have a small problem," Halveth said, sliding a data chip across the table toward me. "A pilot named Aisha Okonkwo, human. She was contracted to fly cargo for one of our research vessels. During that assignment, she gained access to files she was never meant to see, and she left the ship without authorization, taking those files with her." "What kind of files?" I asked. "Proprietary research data," he said, a little too quickly. "Nothing that concerns you. We simply want her returned, along with anything she took, alive if possible. The fee is generous." I looked at the number on the chip, and it was generous indeed, more than double what I usually charged for a single target. That alone should have told me something. In my experience, when someone offers you far more money than the job seems worth, it is usually because the job is worth far more trouble than they are telling you. But I was younger then, and confident, and a little too proud of my own reputation. I told myself that a human pilot with no combat training and no military background would be one of the easier hunts of my career. I took the contract. I spent 2 days studying everything I could find about Aisha Okonkwo before I ever left the station. Public records showed she had grown up on a farming settlement on the edge of human space, one of dozens of children in a large family. The kind of place where everyone learned early how to fix machines with their bare hands because there was no one else around to call for help. She had served for several years as a support pilot, during what the records vaguely called regional conflicts, near a place called the Corvid Rim, before moving into cargo work. Nothing in her file suggested she was dangerous. Nothing suggested she was anything more than an ordinary woman who had made an unlucky decision. I should have paid closer attention to the word unlucky. In my experience, humans rarely do anything by accident. I traced her transport signature through 4 different star systems before I finally found where her ship had gone quiet. A small mining colony on the very edge of consortium space. A rock with almost no name recognition and even less law enforcement, called Perdition's Reach. It was the kind of place people went when they wanted to disappear or when they had nothing left to lose. I flew in alone, as I always do. Bringing a crew to hunt one unarmed pilot would have been an insult to my own skill, and besides, I preferred to work quietly. Loud arrivals invite attention, and attention invites complications. Perdition's Reach was smaller than I expected, a cluster of pressurized domes and mining rigs clinging to the surface of an asteroid barely large enough to hold an atmosphere. The colony had maybe 300 residents, most of them miners and their families, all of them wearing the tired, watchful look of people who had learned not to trust outsiders. I landed my ship at the edge of the main dock, keeping my weapon holstered, because that is simple professional courtesy, and because I genuinely did not expect to need it. I found her ship first, an old cargo hauler with a hull that had clearly been repaired more times than it had been repainted. It sat quiet in a docking bay near the edge of the colony, powered down, waiting. I found Okonkwo herself inside a maintenance bay not far from the dock. She was sitting on an overturned supply crate, cleaning a weapon with slow, careful hands, the kind of motion that comes from years of habit rather than nervousness. 4 other crew members were scattered around the room, 2 humans doing repair work on a piece of equipment, a Regalian engineer running diagnostics on a console, and a Voss navigator standing quietly near the far wall, watching me the moment I stepped through the doorway. Nobody reached for a weapon, nobody shouted. That, more than anything, unsettled me a little, though I did not understand why at the time. Okonkwo looked up at me the way you might look at an unpaid bill that had just landed on your desk. "You're here for the bounty," she said. It was not a question. "I am," I said. "It doesn't have to go badly." She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but a real one, short and sharp, the kind of laugh you give when someone has told a joke at exactly the wrong moment. "You know what that data actually is?" "The thing your client is calling proprietary research." I said nothing, because I honestly did not know, and something in her voice told me I was about to find out. "It's a containment failure log," she said, setting the weapon down slowly on the crate beside her. 8 months ago, the consortium ran an unapproved trial on this colony. A new chemical compound, tested in the air processing systems without telling anyone who lived here. 43 miners died. Officially, it went into the record books as an industrial accident. Equipment failure, nobody's fault. Tragic but unavoidable. I have the internal logs that prove otherwise. I have medical scans showing exactly what killed them. I have 43 names, and I have been trying to get someone in a position of power to actually look at them. The room went very quiet after that. I remember the sound of the ventilation system humming somewhere above us, and the soft clicking of the Regalian engineer's console, and nothing else. "So here is my counteroffer, Reaper," Okonkwo continued, and she said my name, my actual reputation, my title, without a hint of fear in her voice, which was rare enough on its own. "You walk out of here. You tell your client the trail went cold. You and I never have this conversation again. Or, you try to take me in, and you find out exactly why every human colony in this sector keeps its weapon lockers full, even when the official paperwork says we shouldn't need to. I want to be honest with you, because there is no point in telling this story if I am not. I was not afraid of her in that moment. Not of her, not of the 4 crew members standing around that maintenance bay, not of anything I could see in front of me. One woman with a small crew and an old cargo ship, on a mining colony with no orbital defenses and no military presence. I could have taken that colony with a proper strike team in under an hour, and both of us knew it. That is not why I walked away. I walked away because of what she showed me next, and because of the math she calmly laid out in front of me, piece by piece, like she had been waiting years for someone exactly like me to walk through that door. She pulled up a set of local sensor logs on a handheld display, as casually as if she were showing me a weather report. "Here's a question for you," she said. "How long do you think it would take reinforcements to reach us, if I sent one signal right now?" I did not answer, because I genuinely did not know, and I was starting to suspect I did not want to find out. She told me anyway. 3 different human-aligned mercenary crews, all stationed within a few jumps of Perdition's reach, all connected to her through old service records from the Corvid Rim conflicts. Crews who owed her debts measured in something far heavier than money. She showed me exactly how quickly each of them could arrive, and exactly what kind of firepower they would bring with them. Then she showed me the asteroid field just beyond the colony, the one my own sensors had flown past without a single warning, and explained that it was full of hidden supply caches, disguised so well as ordinary mining debris that my ship's systems had never flagged a single one. Her Regalian engineer, it turned out, had studied and adapted stealth technology from several different sources over the years, including, embarrassingly, a design very close to one used by my own employer. "We're not dangerous because we're strong," Okonkwo said, and I remember these words exactly, because they have stayed with me ever since, sitting quietly in the back of my mind through every job I have taken since that day. "We're dangerous because we adapt faster than you can update your assessment of us. Every species that has ever tried to push humanity around has learned that lesson exactly once. We would prefer you learn it the easy way. I stood there for a long moment, running the numbers in my head the way I always do before making a decision in the field. My training told me I still had the advantage in raw skill. My instincts told me something else entirely, that I was looking at a trap that had already closed around me long before I ever landed my ship, and the only real choice left was how gracefully I chose to walk out of it. So I made the only sensible decision available to me. I did not take the bounty. I flew back to Director Halveth and told him the trail had gone cold, that Okonkwo's ship had likely jumped to unknown territory before I arrived, and that further pursuit would not be worth the resources. He seemed unhappy but not surprised, which told me he had probably expected this outcome more than he let on when we first met. I kept the advance payment out of pure stubbornness, because I felt I had earned it simply by walking into that room and walking back out again with my reputation and my ship intact. I did not think about Perdition's Reach again for almost 6 months. Then I heard what happened to the mercenary company that picked up the same contract after I dropped it. It was a well-known outfit, 12 operatives, a solid record with no major failures in over a decade of work. They took the job the consortium offered after my refusal, confident that whatever had made me back away must have been an overreaction on my part. They flew to Perdition's Reach fully prepared, well-armed, and thoroughly briefed. They found the colony. That much is confirmed in the official reports. What they did not find was a way to bring the operation to a successful close. The final report filed with the consortium listed the outcome as unknown complications, cause undetermined, which is the kind of vague language people use when they do not want to admit they do not fully understand what happened to their own people. I know 3 individuals who worked on the recovery effort afterward, cleaning up what remained of that operation. None of them will discuss in detail what they found in that asteroid field. All 3 of them, when I ask, simply go quiet and change the subject, which tells me more than any report ever could. After that, I started paying much closer attention to how humans were spoken about across the wider galaxy, and the more I looked, the more I noticed a pattern that most other species seemed to be missing entirely. Humans, it turned out, had spent every single year since first contact learning. Not fighting for the sake of fighting, not conquering for the sake of conquering, but learning. Studying every species they encountered with the same quiet, patient focus a farmer gives to weather patterns before planting a field. They watched how other governments made decisions. They studied technology from a dozen different civilizations and found ways to combine it into something new. They built relationships with smaller, weaker species that other empires had long ignored, and in return, they gained allies scattered across more systems than most people realized. Most importantly, humans understood something that many older, more powerful species had forgotten over centuries of comfort and dominance: that being underestimated is not a weakness. It is one of the most powerful advantages a species can have. I met other mercenaries over the following years who had taken contracts involving human targets, and I made a habit of asking them how those jobs went. The stories were remarkably similar every time. A target that seemed simple on paper turned out to have prepared for exactly this situation months, sometimes years, in advance. A colony that looked defenseless on approach turned out to have allies arriving within hours. A single pilot with an old cargo ship turned out to have connections reaching into governments and militaries far more influential than anyone expected. One mercenary I knew well, a Kthorn tracker named Osvan who had a reputation nearly as fearsome as my own, told me about a job he took hunting a human engineer accused of corporate theft. He found her easily enough. She had not even tried very hard to hide. What he did not expect was that she had spent the 2 weeks before his arrival quietly turning the entire population of the mining town where she was hiding into witnesses, recording every step of his approach, and forwarding it in real time to a human news network with millions of viewers across a dozen systems. By the time Osvan realized what was happening, his employer was facing a public relations disaster large enough to threaten their entire operation, and Osvan himself found his face broadcast across human space as an example of exactly the kind of behavior their government had been quietly building alliances to oppose. He did not get paid for that job either. He did, however, learn to check for cameras before ever accepting another human-related contract. Another old contact of mine, a bounty hunter working out of the Kesserine systems, told me about tracking a human family who had fled a corrupt local government after refusing to hand over land rights to a mining conglomerate. He expected an easy capture, an ordinary family with no military background, hiding on a remote farming world. What he found instead was a community that had spent generations building informal defense networks completely off the official records, passed down through simple word of mouth and neighborly loyalty rather than any formal military structure. By the time he understood what he was dealing with, Half the farming world had quietly organized to protect that single family, not because they were being paid to, but simply because that is what the community had always done for each other. He also walked away from that job without payment. He also, from what I understand, never took another contract involving humans again. I began to realize that these were not isolated incidents. They were a pattern so consistent that it should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. Humans were not dangerous because of superior weapons or overwhelming military strength, though those things were becoming less unequal with every passing year. Humans were dangerous because of how thoroughly they prepared, how deeply they built loyalty among their own people, and how quickly they turned any attempt to underestimate them into a lesson the offending party would remember for the rest of their career. I began to understand something else too, something that took me much longer to fully accept. The consortium had known exactly what they were sending me into on that first job. They knew the data Okonkwo carried could expose serious wrongdoing on their part. They likely hoped that hiring someone with my reputation would end the problem quietly, without drawing attention, before the truth ever had a chance to spread. When that failed, they simply tried again with a different crew, apparently believing that enough force applied in the right place would eventually solve a problem that force was never actually capable of solving. I do not know what eventually happened to Director Halveth or the rest of the consortium leadership involved in that decision. I do know that within 2 years of my visit to Perdition's Reach, the entire division responsible for that research program was formally dissolved following an investigation that, according to public records, began with information provided by an anonymous source. I have my suspicions about who that source might have been, though I have never been able to confirm it, and I suspect Okonkwo would prefer to keep it that way. I never saw Aisha Okonkwo again after that day in the maintenance bay, though I heard her name mentioned occasionally over the following years, usually in connection with humanitarian work along the edges of consortium space, helping smaller mining colonies negotiate fairer treatment from larger corporate interests. I do not know if the stories are true. I have chosen not to look too closely, partly out of respect, and partly because some part of me still remembers exactly how thoroughly she had prepared for my arrival, and I have no interest in reminding her that I still exist. These days, when younger mercenaries ask me for advice, I tell them the same thing every time. Hunt whoever you like. Take contracts against the Vril, the K-Thorn, any species with an obvious reputation for danger, and you will know exactly what you are walking into. Just leave the humans alone, unless you enjoy discovering, usually far too late, that the target you assumed was soft and unprepared has actually been planning for your arrival since long before you ever accepted the job. I still carry my old reputation. I still take contracts across a dozen systems, and my name still empties bars faster than most people can order a drink. But there is one line in my personal contract terms now, added not long after that job on Perdition's Reach, that every client has to sign before I agree to work with them. No human targets. No exceptions. Not for any price. Some lessons only need to be learned once, if you are paying close enough attention. I was lucky enough to walk away with mine intact. Not everyone in my profession has been quite so fortunate, and I doubt that pattern is going to change anytime soon. So if you ever find yourself sitting across from a client offering you a generous fee to track down an ordinary-looking human who seems on paper like an easy job, do yourself a favor. Ask a few more questions before you accept. Look a little closer at why the fee is so generous in the first place. And remember what I learned the hard way, on a quiet mining colony at the edge of nowhere, from a woman who never once raised her voice or reached for a weapon, because she never needed to. The ones who look the softest are usually the ones who have been preparing for you the longest.